enormous rush to schooling which reflects the desperation for education that you see universally in all the countries that our correspondents have traveled through, and I'm sure many of you have worked from. People are so eager, so that what happened in Kenya initially was that children just flooded into the schools, and she went to school in Kenya where literally first grade classes were 250 kids. And this created a whole number of very challenging problems. There were insufficient teachers at the school she visited. There were 9 teachers for almost 1,000 students. And so that the kids were packed. It was an unforgettable picture that ran with the article. Just you couldn't see a space between bodies into this tiny classroom, so eager to learn, but it's very difficult. And one of the unintended consequences of this very important development was that there were, in places like Malawi, very high failure rates, where kids were in fact in school but not able to learn much. And that's one of the challenges of implementing these kinds of visions. You know, you take one impediment, but others often arise and have to be compensated for. So another of the areas that she found just doing this microcosm was that although primary school fees had been eliminated, the schools still required uniforms, and many of the kids were too poor to afford the uniforms. And in one very painful scene, the teachers singled out those children, made them stand at the front of the room where they were shamed, essentially, in front of their peers. So these show how much work goes into these changes and how many ripple effects there are. Even when a wonderful thing happens, there's still a number of issues to solve. If I turn to another country, India, our correspondents there have really noted that education is an obsession from the very poor to the very wealthy. And it was a few years ago, I believe it was 2005 or 6, there was a terrible fire that swept through a private school in India. And this school was an example of, again, the desperation and the longing for education among relatively poor parents. It had very low fees, and it wasn't very good, and there weren't adequate safety standards, and it prompted a lot of examination of unfortunately how inadequate India's public school system is, which drives any parents that can scrape together anything at all to try to put these kids in, you know, what we would consider inadequate, even private schools that don't match our image of private schools, say in the United States. And this is an issue that I know is being paid a lot of attention in India, and people will know much more than I do about exactly how it's going, but I think that's something that remains a great challenge for the Indian government. And at the other end of the spectrum, the upper level, which I know is, we're often focusing here on poverty, but it also is fascinating. Recently, our correspondent Jim Yardley wrote about the fact that students with some means, certainly, were cramming so intensively to get the very, very few spots that were available at the upper end of education, college placements, university placements, highly sought after sort of technical or science schools that, you know, had just a fraction of places available for tens of thousands of applicants. And he followed this young girl who was only 11 at the time. No, sorry, she was 15. And she had taken 22 separate examinations. She had different tutors every day, and the irony is that she had stopped going to school because the tutorials she felt were better preparing her for college entrance.